Okay, so I'm here with Matthew Koder, and I'm so grateful to have you here on the show. Matthew is a yogi and a performance coach who has truly dedicated his life to the pursuit of the very questions that we ask on the show about God and our relationship to whatever that is. And I'm very much looking forward to finding out Matthew's perspective on that. Matthew, I know a little bit about you, that you're studying with a very special master of Indian mysticism, but you've also explained that it goes deeper than a specific lineage. And so I'm just really, really excited to ask you the question and see how you would answer. Matthew, what and where is God, and what does it have to do with me?
Well, I think what you propose in that question, particularly when that question is asked with the sincerity of a heart and mind that is aligned with, I don't know. When a human being has broken the boundaries of belief and disbelief simultaneously, both ends of those, either if I'm forced to believe something or if I'm forced to disbelieve something, in both instances, I don't know from any personal experience. I'm actually left in this interesting place of a boundary where I'm either pretending to know something or pretending to not know something. And so whenever you ask the question that you just asked with, in my experience, with a sincere heart, in the same feeling and intensity, like when you're a little kid and you look up at the sky and with genuine curiosity you ask, Mom, why is the sky blue? And there's that yearning in your heart to really know the answer. That is from the heart space that, in my experience of asking that question, is really when the doorway to opening begins to crack. But in my situation in particular, I went through both pathways. In my early childhood, I believed in Christ and Christianity and the Christian version of what God was and what it was told to me out of the trust in the elders around me. And then as I got older and as my intelligence, the natural intelligence that is within every human being, started to blossom, and those curious questions that I had about scripture and other things couldn't be answered with anybody's answers that really satisfied the thirst to know in my heart. And taking that and combining it with certain experiences that I was having in my real world, it was making me very reluctant to believe in the version of a God or the creator that had been presented to me through the lens of traditional Christianity, as it was being presented in my area in the Midwest at the time in which I was growing up, which would have been the early 80s, all through the 90s. And it was really about the year 2000 that I had started to really abandon the idea of believing in God and was starting to really lean towards atheism. And but I joined the Marines, and as such, they say there are no atheists in a foxhole. And so I started going back to church during that time period. And but nevertheless, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was just kind of not being honest with myself by believing in something that I didn't know was real. And I was experiencing things in my home life that felt so tragic and so awful at the time. I couldn't for the life of me understand how a God, according to the religious context that it was presented to me, could ever let such things happen or occur. And so that left these very profound ideas in my mind and questions in my heart that I didn't have answers to. And so I went from believing to disbelieving. And then in my disbelieving state, the level of mental emotional suffering that I experienced increased so radically that I reached a fever pitch of pain, where my ability to create my own life under my own understanding was so apparently inept. I was so unconsciously incompetent at how to actually create a wonderful life for myself that I had reached so far down, and it was a truly hopeless situation. My parents had both been on drugs for the vast majority of my life. Um, I grew up the elder brother as well, pretty much completely and totally on my own after the age of 16 to fend for myself, and with total basically a lack of skill, and everybody around me didn't really know how to create or foster joy for themselves. Most of those individuals in my home life and where I grew up were living from the conditioning of trauma and self-destructive tendencies. And so I went into disbelief and didn't know what to do. And then the creator spoke to me. I call it a voice. I had a mystical experience where I heard words that were clearly spoken to me in every language. It felt like it was every language but no language. It was simultaneously the loudest thing I had ever heard and the quietest thing I had ever heard. And it just said to me, you need to love something. And I didn't even know. I mean, and I was so turned off from all, but I listened actually. I immediately so that was like what I would say would be my first real profound mystical experience, an experience I didn't understand. I didn't know fully what it was. I didn't even necessarily fully trust it, but for some reason, out of my youthfulness or maybe my willingness to be obedient, I just listened, and I went and bought this pit bull puppy, and he ended up changing my life. And from that point forward, I knew that I needed to do something different with my life. And I honestly, it wasn't even God that I was trying to ask that question for first. I was just trying to not be in pain. Mm. And I didn't know if God was real. I didn't know if he was real. What I did know was that I had no direct experience of him, and I could no longer rest on the idea of believing something or disbelieving something. Mm. And there was nothing. There was no scripture. There was no person. There was no priest or pastor that I could speak to that could verbally talk me into a belief or anything. I mean, it was impossible for me. Me and those kinds of things were completely impossible. But I'd had this mystical experience, and I knew it was mystical, like a piece of my inner core registered that something really special had happened to me. But I was so full of pain that it was like it planted a seed, moved me in a direction, and then my life got chaotic again for a little while. And then I went into this yoga class, just a gym yoga class, nothing special. And I had an experience where that which was me and that which was me, or was not me, suddenly there was no me and there was no other. There was just me and me everywhere. And I didn't feel any pain at all. And in fact, I didn't even feel what I often call like joy or bliss as we know it, but I felt something deeper. Like there was an experience at that time that I give a kinesthetic language frame to. It was beyond joy. It was beyond bliss. And it was so profound. I didn't know what was going on. And I thought that this experience that was happening to me was only maybe a few short minutes, like 10 minutes. And it was actually nearly 8 hours had went by. And so when I got out of that experience, I honestly didn't know what was happening. And I started questioning my sanity a little bit. I thought maybe I had a brain tumor, but all I knew was that whatever that was, I wanted more of whatever that experience was. I wasn't associating it with God or anything. I just knew whatever that experience was, I want more of that thing. And I could immediately, and maybe fortunately, because it happened to me when I had went to this gym yoga class, I started to associate it with yoga. And I didn't know what yoga was. I had no idea. Honestly, I thought yoga was just really bad fitness for women. And so I had no interest in any of it at the time. In fact, you wouldn't have been able to get me in a class. And then I started studying yoga, and everything about yoga was all about God, God, God. What is God? God, all of this stuff. And for the first several years of me practicing, I really didn't have any interest in what was God. I didn't care. And that question had not risen in my heart with that sincerity that I was referencing earlier. The only thing I could feel in the beginning was a deep desire to be beyond the pain that had saturated my heart and my mind. And these processes that I was now uncovering, that I was now discovering, that I was now putting into practice with sincere intensity and the same level of discipline and commitment that a professional athlete or a Navy SEAL would apply to their craft, I was applying to these processes. And so I was having all of these transformations within myself, within my body. And I went on this long, several year period of just my whole entire world and how I saw it was completely dismantled. And so through that process, and understanding that my mind had this tendency to create a cage for my intelligence in the form of what we call conclusions. I had all these conclusions about what life was, what you know and the power and the profundity of I don't know still had yet to emerge in my heart, even though I was doing all of these things. And then, like the flower blossoming naturally from the sowing of seeds, one day that question really started to rise in my heart in a really, really, really big way. And since I had been in these processes, at that time, once that question rose in my heart, I was no longer seeking up anymore for God or seeking in books. I started to seek solutions only within myself. And so I started spending more and more time in doing practices that had previously been closed off to me, different prayer processes and various other types of mystical practices. Because for me, to answer that question with my mind will not suffice. I deeply needed an experience of what God was.
Mm.
And I know that many people now presently share that sentiment. And I even see, and now being involved in these experiences, I think that this question is beginning to arise even more deeply into people's hearts. And to answer what is God, my initial thing is to tell you that to speak about subjective dimensions in words is nearly impossible, because no matter how much I describe it, and in some ways I feel like I put audience members in a very difficult position, because if I try to relate to you some of my experiences in words, you might then desire to either believe me or disbelieve me. And again, like I said at the beginning of this, I feel like that's a very interesting conundrum for a person to be in, because if you believe my experience, maybe you create some imaginations for yourself that don't actually that hinder your ability to have an experience. Or maybe if you don't believe me, you create another conclusion about me or whatever, and that thing also hinders your ability to have an experience. And so for me, I would say for anybody who listens to anything that I'm about to say, I think if nothing else, you should just disbelieve everything that I'm going to say, and you should intensely try to prove me wrong. And just go hunt for that answer with as much sincerity in your own heart. Like, I don't know what this is, but I can't just trust this guy's word for it. I can't trust anybody's word for it. I have to know this for myself. And when that question rises in a person's heart with that level of intensity, then the amazing thing is that which it is that we call God, the creator, he's waiting for us. I use the the pronoun, the word he, just as a general representation. However, in my experience, what we call the creator, this is my present level of experience of it. In the beginning, I had no sensitivity to it. Once I had started reaching my adolescence, the sensitivity to this force, very much like they call the force in Star Wars, I had slowly over time lost sensitivity to it. And then through these processes, what I started to really understand was taking place was that I was recovering my sensitivity to an intelligence far greater than my own, to what I like to think of as the universal superintelligence, an intelligence that is so great, so magnificent, and so powerful that it has given rise to everything that we see in creation. And we often think of God as love, or we hear that God is love, God is peace, God is these things. And as I've explored those questions, I find that most people give God a label to that which they're missing. If they're missing peace, they'll say God is love. If they're missing love, they'll say God is love. And in my experience, then, when you look at what the yogic traditions was asking of us, you hear this word all the time: mukti, 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 liberation, 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 mukti, liberation, God, mukti, liberation. They're just everywhere. All of these people that are doing these processes, they're saying these words, and I didn't understand for a very long time what that meant, what liberation meant. And again, even on an intellectual level, you might somehow intellectually get it, but the key is to try to transition it from an intellectual understanding into a visceral physical experience. And that's where I feel that it's so important that people find processes and practices that work for them. And there have been countless masters throughout time that have offered us pathways to this, and Jesus Christ being one of them, Buddha being one of them, Lao Tzu, Rumi, Hafiz, Kabir. Many, many, many saints and sages, both men and women, have came down and offered us pathways to the same universal mountaintop. And that universal mountaintop is to have this direct experience with that which is the source of our creation. So for me, when I answer that question, I would say God is that which is the source of our creation. And people will say, well, what is he, or what is it, where is it? And in my experience of it, it is in everything. It is in the ground you drive on, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, the car you drive, the stars you see in the sky, the space in between. It is both form and formless. In fact, I would listen to these mystics and I couldn't understand how they would say that shit was as sacred as, something like a shrine. Shit was as sacred as a shrine. And for the longest time, I couldn't understand what they had meant. But on the surface level of our human experience, our brains are designed to create discernment so that we can navigate the physical environment. They're designed for us to have this experience of duality, but the deeper one goes into oneself, and as one develops this ability to draw the rays of attention towards the source of attention, we will experience a boundless state of existence where we'll actually take these accumulated forms in the form of our body, these accumulated forms in the form of our mind, and we'll begin to gain a sense of distance from them, where it's almost like we're pulling back and back and back. And the more we gain distance from them, the more that we actually see that our body and our minds are things that we have accumulated, that they're not actually us, but they are ours. They're our bodies, they're our minds, and they're like machines for us to use to be able to enjoy and navigate this physical environment. And once we know how to use this machine, then our experience of this absolutely indescribably magnificent experience that we call life goes from feeling like a burden to feeling like an unlimited possibility. And when you come into contact with the source of your creation, you feel a wholeness, a fulfillment, a homecoming. It's beyond a sense of completion. And it's not even a becoming. It's an undoing of everything that you have gathered on top. And it's such a returning to home that you realize how much existence is simply about enjoying the experience of existing. And this presence that we call God, while we might, when we're in our waking state, unless you've trained and practiced these things and you've sensitized your system enough that where you literally actually see, and you see how the creator communicates to you through people and omens and all of these other synchronistic events and all these different things, where you can actually see how you're being guided within and without. And you know, what you will find is that experience is something that you would not trade for anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a priceless experience that you realize this is the sole reason why I am here.
Yeah.
Is to actually have this experience, and then to in some ways, I guess you could say, there was this old a story of a Zen master who was walking around Japan, and he would carry this heavy load on his bag, and he meets another Zen master, and the Zen master asks him what Zen is, and he takes off the bag.
Mm.
And then they stand there for a second, and then he puts the bag on and he just keeps walking.
Mm.
And so most people don't see what he was doing in that. But the first thing is to take off the load of life. You're taking the load of life off, to drop the load of life and living. And then to pick the load back up and to carry it consciously.
Yeah.
Through the awareness that awakens in you the more you come into contact with that. And so I have discovered, this is not my information. This is the creator's information as he has handed it down through countless masters, that there is a process, there is a mechanism for the human being to align their system in such a way that the human system becomes like an antenna, like an antenna on our houses. If the antenna isn't in alignment, then the screen on our TVs used to be fuzzy. And then if you just get the antenna in alignment, then poof, a whole universe just comes into that TV set.
Yeah.
And this would be the closest analogy that I could give to what my experience has been like with these processes for the last 15, well, I guess going on now 17 years, actually. And one thing I can say for sure is that it doesn't matter what you know or even what you've experienced. The creator is so grand and so magnificent that there's a never-ending opening. Yeah. Some new dimension, some new aspect keeps revealing itself to you all the time, again and again and again. And so when I describe, to try to use language, English language, to best describe it, I always say that God is intelligence. Unfathomable intelligence.
Yeah.
And you have access to that. And if you gain access to that by having the courage to go through your body, through your heart, through your mind, through your energy system, like an Amazonian expeditionist following the Amazon River down to the very end of a tributary, where you don't know what jungle animals are going to be in your heart, what uncharted tribes, but you have that kind of courage that you could go alone into the Amazon, because that's what the inner experience is like. It's like going solo trekking through the Amazon. But if you're the kind of Christopher Columbus like explorer that you could sail off into an ocean without needing to know where you're heading,
Mm.
then something really magical is waiting for you. And so then for me, I've discovered that that which it is that we call a guru is really more like a GPS than anything else. Like my GPS brought me here to the Isha Institute of Inner Sciences as I came from Daytona Beach. And so when I look to beings like Christ or Buddha or Lao Tzu or other individuals, I see these individuals as light bringers so that we can um, use their words not to believe, but to guide us,
Mm.
to guide us so that we ourselves walk the paths that they walked, that we take what they say and we actually attempt to, like, it's almost like when Christ is saying to love your neighbor or give you some piece of insight, to put that into practice and see what result that brings in your life. Walk down that path, study your insides while you do that.
Mm.
And different ones of these individuals, they brought unique aspects to it. Like Buddha brought insight, Christ brought love and compassion and so many other wonderful things. And J.D. Krishnamurti, Ramana Maharishi, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, the female saint Sri Manandamayama, the magnificent yogi saint Paramahansana Yogananda, his guru Sri Yukteswar. There have been entire lineages of masters, Gurdjieff, the European mystic, uh, so many modern day mystics like Eckhart Tolle and other individuals that are helping us to find the tools that we can put together in our own toolkit so that that question, what is God, cannot be answered in a thought form, but can be answered in a flowered experience.
Mm. Wow. Thank you, Matthew. That was, I just want to breathe that in for a moment. I feel uplifted after listening to you speak. And I feel like that was such a beautiful, very articulate and relatable journey too, of this path to exploring that question of what is God, like your story of being younger and not believing, and then having this really profound experience, and then going really in depth into your own experiences and studies. I would love to, I took some notes while you were speaking of just little moments and takeaways. So I'd love to just do a quick recap and share, what I heard as a conclusion to what you shared, if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely. Please do.
Cool. I also want to say that I can tell that there's just so much depth to what you have to share, and that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so perhaps we get to have, another, like, I'm like, I want to know what Matthew says about so many other questions that we'll just have to do another show sometime to talk about, for example, just to give some teasers of like, well, then according to, your experience, why does God let hard things happen to people? And what is the soul? We've talked about God, but what's the soul? And so those are things we can look forward to, because I know that you will have a lot of really beautiful insights on those questions too. But yeah, I took some notes here. And so, we started with this idea of God almost as the unknowable. And, you referred to God as the creator a few times, as intelligence, as the universal superintelligence. But what really landed for me is God as a personal experience of deep knowing inside of one's own heart. That was something that landed for me. I don't know if those were your exact words, but that was something that I took away from what you spoke.
Well, you really captured the essence.
Mm,
The experiences that you have become so aligned with every compartment of your system, from the core of what you are, through your energy system, through your mental system, through your emotional system, through your physical system. And so you feel it so viscerally, so thoroughly, like being Imagine if we, when you dip a washcloth into water and it just gets soaked up with the water.
Mhm.
The experience is like that. You get drenched in the divine, and literally it's so beyond imagining that for even the hardest hearts, tears of joy will very likely flood out of you in quantities that you didn't even know that you could experience.
Yeah. And I think that's really uplifting and inspiring. And it just makes it feel like, wow, this magic that you've just shared could be accessible to anyone. And in fact, that brings to the last definition that I wrote down when I was listening, was that which is the source of creation in everything and everywhere. And then I guess you could add, and for everyone and in everyone. So,
Yes, and in fact, a great practice to do is if you can walk around the world and look for
mm,
the Native Americans referenced it as the indwelling spirit of an object. And I often just like to call it its isness, its essence. If you can slow down for a moment, the tendency to label everything that you see with your mind, to give it a name, to call it a light post or asphalt or grass
mm,
or trash can or shit or snake or sky or cloud, all of these sound structures that we were taught as kids. Like, if we can go back and remember that at one point in time we didn't know language.
mm,
And when you look at a baby's eyes, what you notice about a baby's eyes, you can actually, if you're sensitive enough, you can see when a human being is on receptive mode and when they're on input mode.
mm,
And the reason a baby's eyes are so bright and so beautiful is because they're kind of locked into receptive mode
mm,
in receiving, and they're not labeling. So they shine so in such an unobstructed way. Personality isn't hiding the light of consciousness. And if
mm,
you can practice looking at objects, for anybody, this is part of what I would do. I would just look at stuff and realize I really don't know what you are. I've told myself that I know what you are because that's what my education system wanted from me. But if my education system worked at helping me to live a good life, I wouldn't be miserable and I wouldn't be broke. And so clearly, and then as I look around me too, all I see is misery. If I see broke people, I see misery. If I see rich people, I see misery. So who's doing it right if everybody's miserable?
mm,
And so when I started to basically defrag my own mind, unlearning what I had learned. And I stopped trying to think that I knew everything, and I started to live very deeply from I knew nothing. In fact, there was many years where I really, really did not know anything. I did not know anything. I didn't know what anything was. And this was in my adult years. I realized that I had been told what things were, but
mm,
I had no direct experience as to what anything was. My seeker nature had been extinguished out of me through the educational conditioning and through environmental circumstances, and it needed to be reawakened. So I would sit for long periods and just stare at a blade of grass and just be like, what are you? And
mm,
if you have the ability to just sit and look at something as simple as a blade of grass or an ant, this is something that's really fascinating as well, because all you have to do is just look and pay extreme attention. And this was before I even knew that yogis had really cool names for this stuff. But if you look at something, like if you look at an ant, one of the things that you'll discover is that singular individual ant cares tremendously about what it's doing,
mm,
and it cares tremendously about protecting its own life with the same intensity that you care about protecting your own life. And he's out there living a whole world, a whole existence that is absolutely important to him. And an ant is smack dab with intelligence, what
mm,
they can lift, their endurance, their intelligence to navigate, how they work together as a collective, it's absolutely magnificent. And then you think to yourself, how could something engineer this? If you look at what we try to create, even with robotics and stuff, and you see the clunky robot dogs walking around, what a human being tries to create is always a very, very poor reflection comparative to what Mother Nature has already created. And if you spend time looking at those things without labeling them, the amazing thing that I discovered is that creation speaks. Life itself is the ultimate guru if we have the willingness to listen.
Mm.
But in order to listen, we have to drop the idea that we know everything already. And unfortunately, with Google at our fingertips and now with AI around the corner, and and we can read somebody's book and go, oh, I know it because I read it from Jimmy John. And unfortunately, we might be further from knowing something if we read it in a book. And so I think of the old Confucius practitioners would always say that the finger pointing to the moon isn't the moon. So whenever I hear the words of a great master, I never use their words as the moon. I always treated them as signposts towards something deeper, something that I was supposed to experience. And then what you start to discover is that all of these guys teaching this stuff are sharing what they're sharing, they're offering. Most of the time you would be better if you just sat with them and they didn't speak and you didn't speak and you just sat and closed your eyes and tried to and just let yourself soak in the energies that reverberate from their being. But if you're a person like me, where when I started this, belief wasn't in the options, God wasn't an option, then the first step is to start to find a pathway out of your pain, to know that there actually is a pathway out of your pain, but the solution won't be in the accumulation or the acquisition of more things. And you have to kind of come to that conclusion that I can't acquire my way to the pleasantness that I'm seeking. And so clearly, if you can come to that point, if you're in that place, then I feel at that place is when that crack of curiosity for the question that you're asking here today really starts to emerge. And when that question is like a burning, roaring desire, like if you've ever been so thirsty after a long road trip, like in a desert climate where the water's just been sucked out of your system, and maybe even you've drinking like a soda or something that has some sodium in it, and you just catch yourself so thirsty that when you're like, I will literally do anything for water. If you can come to the point where that question of what is God with the feeling like I would do anything for a drink of water, then the answer is quite literally right there. Right there. It's right there. And you can have it because the Creator wants you to have it. It is all of our is my experience of this, and my not my conclusion, but my experience of it, sharing my experience, that this is something that must happen to everybody on the planet. Like whether or not you become the best football player in the world, whether or not you become the greatest entrepreneur, whether or not you become the concert pianist, or whatever it is that you want to do in terms of society and social circumstances, maybe or maybe not, those things will happen for you. There are a lot of factors that go into that. But this one thing of touching the core of your being should happen to everyone before they leave this life.
I'm into that. Yeah. Well, Matthew, I'd love to just leave with kind of a blessing that we can all be so open, and that we can all be so curious and open and tap into that sense of wonderment, and so that we can truly listen, and so that we can really hear that which is always being whispered into our ears as we go on. And so may we all be able to tap into such a curiosity and wonder and openness that we can listen and tap into the essence of of that which we call God, however we choose to define it. And thank you so much for all that you shared today. And I just want to remind everyone that this is Matthew Koder. And is there a place where people can go if they want to connect with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, the best place to connect with me right now is probably just Instagram.
Great.
I'm kind of like an undercover monk at the moment, and so if somebody wants to get a hold of me, that's usually like Instagram is a little bit like my where I document my life and create content, just hang out with folks and stuff in that social network environment.
Is it just
But
your
yeah,
name?
just my name, Matthew Koder.
Okay, Matthew Koder is Koder.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this is such a special opportunity to get to drop in with you, and hopefully we'll get to do it again.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. It was such a special opportunity for me as well, to get to participate in this profound question, and for you to give me the opportunity to share how the Creator has graced and blessed me with so many different wonderful experiences. And so I just feel so fortunate that you gave me the opportunity here today. So thank you.
Okay.
Everyone, thank you so much for listening. I am Sheefra Blume, your hostess, and this is the What is God podcast. Please go ahead and like this episode if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the What is God podcast so that you can continue to hear people from all walks of life share their answer to the question, what and where is God, and what does it have to do with me? And listen to the journeys and stories that got them to their answers. This started for me with an essay that I wrote at 21 years old called What and Where is God and What Does It Have to Do with Me? And today I get to ask other people their answers to this question. It is my absolute pleasure to do so. And please go ahead and to learn more about how I help guide people to their own personal answer to their relationship with that which we call God, visit me at sheefrablume.com. You can also find me at Sheefra Blume on TikTok or Instagram. Until the next one, y'all.